Good morning, everybody. My name is Tommi Öitti, and I'm Startup Community Manager here at Business Tampere. I'm happy to be here now and opening and welcoming you to the How to Get Pre-Seed and Seed Funding workshop. This is a 3-hour long workshop session held between 9 and 12 o'clock, and it will be recorded. The workshop is guided by Will Cardwell from Courage Ventures, and we are very glad to have you, Will. Thanks a lot for coming. Today, myself, I am acting here as a technical moderator behind the scenes, and I will show myself when needed. I have also my colleague here, Tapio, and you will introduce yourself and your role after this, my speech here. The session for you guys there, this is fully interactive, and we highly appreciate your questions, especially through the chat. We'll let you know when it's the right time to make those questions. So please, this is your chance. Whatever you have always wanted to know about pre-seed and seed funding. Please keep your cameras on if possible, so we will have it also even more interactive. So as final note here for today, so today's workshop is organized, as said, by Business Tampere, and we have a warm support by Turku Science Park and Business Oulu and Six Cities Strategy as well. Thank you for the supporters. So let's get the ball rolling. Tapio, please introduce yourself and your role, and then let's get the morning started with you, Will. There you go.
Thank you, Tommi. My name is Tapio Sik, and I'm a colleague of Tommi in Business Tampere, and my main sort of responsibility there is to help the companies regarding their funding issues. And this workshop, of course, is a very good example of the things that we organize there, and then try to make sure that you guys there get the good information and also help with your own issues when you're looking for the funding for your company. I will be helping Tommi here and look into the chat and pick up some of the questions from there, so we can then present them to Will in the end of the sessions when there is the right time for it. So without further ado, Will, I will pass this to you, and you can start running the show, please.
Excellent. Okay. Great to see everybody here. Let's see, can I share already, or do you have to do anything to my status? Let's see.
I think you should be able.
Okay. So.
You got it. Thanks.
We got it. All right. Let me just arrange a couple things. Good. So yeah, great to see everybody. I've done this session or similar sessions several times, and hopefully I'm learning little by little how to optimize it. But basically what I'm trying to do here is to give you a feeling for the investor mindset from the perspective of a finished pre-seed or seed funded company. So meaning, or either unfunded or pre-seed. So in other words, if you're looking to either get your first or second round of capital, I think it's really important to understand the way the investors look at things. So I'm going to talk to you about a number of concepts. Myself, I've been here in Finland since 1996. Gosh, I guess I've known Tapio since 1999, 2000-ish. So I've been through several life cycles of the Finnish startup community. I started in venture capital all the way back in 1999. I'll tell a little more about that in a moment. But today I basically am a partner in 3 different funds and then have some of my own investments. So a total of about 50 investments in pre-seed, seed, Series A companies in Finland, the Baltics, and in Eastern Europe. I'm originally from the United States, from the East Coast, Virginia. Lived a lot of time in North Carolina, and I'm actually an adjunct professor at the University of North Carolina as well, teaching venture capital and finance. So great to see all of you. I think as I see, at least from the registrations, you're really from all over Finland. Over the 26 years, I think I've been to pretty much every part of Finland many times. So I do understand where you're coming from and a little bit what you're trying to do. I also notice a lot of international people here in Finland. Something I really feel strongly about is seeing more and more international teams or multinational teams, multicultural teams. And actually amongst my portfolio, 70% of the 50 companies, 73% I think, or at least woman co-founded or founded. And about a third of them, or at least more than a third of them have multicultural teams. And so I really believe in that. In the sectors that I invest in are primarily health tech, ed tech, education technology, environmentally related digital technologies, and then of course anything else that kind of looks interesting. And I've, as part of these several different funds, I've made during the COVID period, I've been part of about 55 investments now. So still very active and feel like I know the current climate pretty well. So timetable wise, what we try to do here is have basically 40-minute presentations followed by 10-minute Q&A and then a 10-minute break. And then repeat at 10 and then basically at 11 as well. So I encourage you from a kind of a interactivity standpoint, think about your questions, feel free to post them anytime in the chat. And you know, if you've got something that you think is super relevant for exactly the moment, I'm happy if you raise your hand and want to make a comment. But I'm also aware, I mean, we have a fairly large group here. So I've got a fair amount of material that I'm going to share. So I want to make sure we get through it all. So I may not be able to address in detail questions until those kind of slots. And then of course the fact, like as Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Hopefully we can stick to this timetable pretty closely. But there's always you know, forgive me if we slip 5 minutes one way or the other. All right. So what are we going to try to answer in this session? So I would be disappointed if at the end of this session, you will not understand these kind of something about these 7 issues. So first of all, you know, what a fundraising strategy really is. And, you know, there are many different levels to it, but I think I can help you think about that from your personal perspective, your company's perspective. Who is your ideal investor? I think, you know, one problem startups have often is they too much kind of give in once they run into somebody that has money that's ready to put into the company. They don't realize that maybe the visions aren't perfectly aligned. And so they take the money and then they start paying for it 3, 6, 9 months down the road when your kind of strategy and your as the founder, your approach and goals diverge from the investors. So very important to think about what this investor looks like. So I'll share some stuff with that. How do you track a fundraising process? Fundraising, you'll see me over and over. It's really a selling process more than anything else. So it's, you know, if you sell a product, that's one thing. Here, you're basically selling your shares, selling your company to investors. So it just like you have a CRM for your sales process, you should also have a CRM and really track and look at the metrics of your fundraising process. So that's another thing I'll talk about. We'll look specifically who are the active Finnish investors and look actually at a number of recent deals. What do deals in Finland look like, both venture capital and angel backed? What are investors looking for at the end of the day? That's something we'll come back towards the end. And then I'm not going to really go through seed decks, but I've got some links. You probably may have access to these as well. But I think it's really interesting to look at successful companies, how they approached their fundraising, what was their pitch, yeah, and then kind of think through the think through your process. Hey, by the way, I see the questions here. I think maybe, I'm not sure everybody could see the link earlier. So I have a link here. So there are two things. There's slides in there, and then there's also a fundraising workbook that I'm going to come back to later. But it's something. There's a Google sheet in there. You have viewing access, but you're more than welcome to make your own copy. And again, I'm going to show you how to use it a little bit later. So that's my idea of what I think can be accomplished in 3 hours this morning. Keep in mind, definitely can't cover everything. So there are a ton of technical stuff out there that I'm not going to go to, but I'm more than willing to share. There's a number of links that I'll share that can help you with things like, okay, what are the details of a cap table? What is what should financial forecasts look like? Stuff like this. I'm going to touch on all that, but I'm not going to go deeply since due to time. Okay, just who am I? I think this is the same with all investors. I really feel that I define myself. Define myself by the entrepreneurs that I'm backing, and so I'm in my portfolio now 50 companies. This is just a sample of them. But it's 50 human relationships, and actually more, because as an active early stage investor, it's not a dispassionate, removed process. It's an active process, and you get to feel the pain and the joys of the entrepreneurs, and unfortunately, the entrepreneurs get to feel the pains and joys of the investors as well. But at the end of the day, there is a social aspect to this. I'm going to get to that because I think it's super important. To actually being able to convince an investor to actually put money into your bank account. And I think this is something very simple, but something that people forget at the end of the day. And I'll talk about the process. But basically, fundraising fails if nobody invests at the end, right? And so while some people actually love the fundraising process itself as a process, I'll always remind you that really the idea of fundraising is to just get it done as quickly as possible and get back to your core business. And that's defined by, the time between you start and when you get the money in the bank. So I'm going to talk a bunch about this stuff. All right, so here are kind of 4 objectives of the session. It's going to be loosely related to those 3 sections, because we're going to look at the fundraising workbook at the end in more detail. But first, I want to start with motivating how to fundraise, how to think about fundraising. Then I want to talk about the investor mindset. That mostly is probably going to come in the second session, and then really more practically about the material and stuff that you need to prepare as a founder. So again, I'll remind you, if you're thinking, if you come up with thought, put it on the board, or just write it down and wait for when I open up for questions. All right, background, mindset, super important. Defining the targets, meeting the right people, which is super tricky in COVID times, but also funny enough, in a way even more possible than it was before. Using the right tools, preparing physical and digital material. So, again, we're getting more and more digital with COVID, but you still need to think about, kind of also having materials at your disposal that you can share when you meet people face to face. And then, all this comes together in your ability to deliver a pitch in a bunch of different contexts, one-to-one, on the stage, in a small group, at a cocktail party, whatever. How to kind of pull your story apart to make it have the optimal impact on the investor. All right, so first, how to fundraise. So I have something that I always do. It takes about 4 minutes, but I think it's the most interesting look at the approach to fundraising by a true master. Now, this guy, Peter Diamandis, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of him. He is the founder of XPRIZE, one of the founders of Singularity University, and a number of companies. So the conversation I'm going to show you here, let me start setting it up, is going to be between him and a venture capitalist. You're not going to see the venture capitalist off to the side in the beginning, but I say this because he's a little bit of a weird character, and he's taken some hits during COVID because he's got some strange beliefs outside of his core kind of entrepreneurial views. So I'm not standing up for those. You can look those up if you want. But basically, he was like kind of a COVID denier, which was a very weird stance for scientists to take. But I think this is the most brilliant kind of short description of what it really means to connect and raise money. And so I always like to show this, and I'm going to temporarily stop the share because I'm going to start it again with if I can find where the heck did it go? Because I'm going to open it up because it shows basically what the potential is when you're raising money and how it is you connect with people. And now I'm going to share the sound. I'm going to test quickly that the sound works. Usually it does, but I'll do a 5-second clip to start with, and then I'll stop, and then if those of you that have camera on, if you could just give a thumbs up or thumbs down as to whether it's actually working. All right, hold on.
The question was about fundraising and the lessons learned from fundraising because it was such a new.
Okay, good. All right, so now I'm going to maximize this. And so he's basically on stage at Stanford University, and he's got a venture capitalist to the side. You're going to see it's about a 4-minute clip. And I think, just kind of write down what you think of when you hear this, because there's a number of insights I'll point to when we get out.
Integral part of XPRIZE and everything you did.
Start over.
The question was about fundraising and the lessons learned from fundraising because it was such an integral part of XPRIZE and everything you did. So it is probably one of the most critical skills.
Audio, but not to see the video.
Oh, that's a problem. Okay, let me see what's going on there. Oh, you're seeing my WhatsApp.
No, we are just seeing you.
Seeing me. That is weird. Okay, let's see. Share. I think, sorry about this, there's always some technical issue, but why? So some reason my sharing.
You should be able to share again, like somehow it disappeared now.
Oh yeah. Got it. Okay, hold on. Sorry about that. How about now?
I think now it's better.
Okay, so we'll go back. Sorry about that. There's always a little bit of a back and forth. All right, so you see the whole screen.
Now we can see it. Yeah, thanks.
All right.
The question was about fundraising and the lessons learned from fundraising because it was such an integral part of XPRIZE and everything you did.
So it is probably one of the most critical skills that you can learn. I think of fundraising as energy transfer. It's going to someone and convincing them to give you some energy that you can go use to go and accomplish something. And I had a formative moment in my life, my sophomore year at MIT. I had started my first organization ever. It was called SEDS, Students with Exploration and Development of Space. And it's, become a global student space organization. And I'd started the first chapter at MIT, and I needed $5,000 to print a newsletter and mail it out. And I went to Draper Labs, and I met with the head of Draper, and I knew they were profitable. They were nonprofit. They had money, and I was pitching them my heart out. Would you please? I need just $5,000. And he says, "I'm sorry, we're a nonprofit. We cannot give money. What you're doing is great, but." So I was walking out the door, and I stopped, and I said, "Well, could you instead print my newsletters? He said, sure, we got a whole printing facility here. I said, would you mail them? He said, absolutely. We probably got about $25,000 worth of printing and mailing from Draper over the years, that year and the following years. And it hit me that there is, whenever you go and you ask something, first of all, you have to ask. I mean, the first rule of sales is you have to ask. You have to believe in yourself and what you're doing passionately enough that you're willing to give this person the opportunity to help you or to be involved. And then you have to ask. And then you have to commit to yourself, I'm not going to walk away from having invested that time without something. It may simply be, why aren't you investing? What advice do you have for me to go and on my next call? You know, who can you introduce me to that does want to do this? And I think other thing I learned, a sage fellow, Al Kurth, taught me is in my early days, X Prize. He said, when you ask for money, you'll get advice. And when you ask for advice, you might get money. And that stuck with me a long time. So I used to be extraordinarily impatient. You know, hello, what's your name? Can you give me some money, please? And I learned that that's not necessarily the best way. People, when people invest in you or in your project, they're investing in you. It's a transfer of confidence. So you really need to build a relationship with that person in a way that you touch their heart, they understand why you care about this, how it relates to them, and then they will naturally want to get involved. But I can't emphasize enough how important that is in a skill. If you want to go and do something, it's about convincing other people to join you, bring their technology, bring their money, have George invest in your company.
Yeah, it's amazingly true, because we see it with entrepreneurs. Some of the best entrepreneurs, in the fundraising process, the fundraising is secondary to wanting to get groups of people involved. They don't show up and say, you know, the calculation of how much money you're going to make is 4.7x over 3 years. They don't do that. And a lot of people ask me and other venture people, you know, how do you decide to fund something? You know, what is the critical amount, what are the critical internal rate of return? I'm like, there is none. And some people say, well, like, how can there be none? I was like, well, we like to think, can we return 10 times the invested capital? But the reason why we say 10 times is really because the way we qualified in our heads is, can this generate a sufficient breakout that we're proud of our association, and it could also make money? But 10x is really just a qualifier. It's not really mathematical in the sense, and that always puzzles people, but it's actually the truth. You've said it the best out of anyone I've ever heard.
Thank you.
Okay, good. So there's so many nuggets of truth in there, but let me try to get us back to a real issue finding all my stuff these days. Okay, here it is. So this is, you know, in a smaller group, there's a huge discussion that you can do based on this. So because there's so much in there, but I'm going to just give you in this context, I'm going to give you a few of my own takeaways, because I think, like I said, this is, if there's one short video that's ever changed my approach to anything, it's been this one. And so I want to kind of get the most out of it. I think the first thing is he talks about you need to ask. So he says, you know, if you go through, do a pitch and then leave, and nobody knows what you're actually looking for, it's a missed opportunity. So definitely you need to ask. Then the classic line, if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you might get money, is fundamentally true. I find that all the time, and almost every company that I've invested in has been a result of a growing 6 to 12 month process that started with just, you know, maybe in a session like this, maybe, you know, maybe it's an inbound sending me the deck. It doesn't generally happen overnight. Sometimes it does, but more often than not, it's a result of a relation building process. Always get something out of every meeting. We're going to talk about what the kind of timeline and kind of what it looks like to raise money. But you know, if even when people say no, try to figure out something and log it. I'll show you in that workbook where you can log it. Log what you've gotten out of it so you can adjust your message and or you know, usually not your product or service or strategy, but usually you look for a way to adjust your message so it's more clear. Second, like I said, he says fundraising is actually secondary to building a community. You'll see I talk about communities a lot. Building a community around you and your company that supports it. Sometimes, you know, some of those community members are going to put cash in the company for shares. They'll be investors. Others will put effort into the company, connections into the company. That's also resources. That's also a way to kind of get something out of relationships. And I have some links for ideas how you can actually optimize those kind of non-cash relationships. And then the last most interesting, I mean, maybe not the most interesting thing, but when the venture capitalist comes out and says, you know, we kind of think about trying to get 10 times our money back, but that's just a kind of a big picture idea. And I agree with that also. So, you know, I'm going to go through an example in just a minute, talk a little bit about how widely valuations can vary depending on who's looking at the case. And yes, at the end of the day, one of the value propositions you're giving to the investors, you're going to give them a great rate of return. But beyond that, there's got to be more in general to get them to actually make an investment in itself. So a lot of interesting stuff in there. But let's move forward. Now it's going back to this. All right, so we'll go here. So yeah, so my takeaway, the big picture here, fundraising is more about strategy, art, and philosophy than math, science, and finance. Now, the reason I say this is because your way of strategically finding and bringing along and onboarding an investor, or much more than a scientific kind of undertaking. You have to have the math, science, and finance. So at the end of the day, you have to have some projections about what you think your future is going to be. You're going to have a cap table with, you know, how much percentage everybody's going to get. There's going to be math, science, and finance there at the end of the day. But nobody ever got investment. You're never going to walk into an investor and say, I'm going to give you 100 times your money back. And that's going to be the thing that the investor says, oh, wow, here's the money. Never happens. Much more about do we share a vision? And so in that sharing a vision is strategic and really philosophical, in my opinion. And I'll dig much deeper into that. All right, here's a typical kind of flow chart or kind of general kind of image people give of fundraising. So, and this is at a very high level. So, and I'll get to my comment here. If you think of this way, you'll never make it in a moment. But basically, so in a vacuum, this is true. You start by making an introduction and connecting to an investor. You definitely want to use networks. You definitely want to avoid cold calls. No doubt about it. You want to get warm intros. Very true. Hopefully it'll lead to a meeting. First few meetings, it's only about kind of prosecuting forward, getting multiple meetings. After 3 or 4 meetings, you start, the investors really starting to focus on things like, who your team is, what's the size of the opportunity, seeing if you can start sharing a vision with the investor. After that, once they kind of give a kind of a oral kind of yes or oral commitment, you'll get to things like determining evaluation, talk about in a minute. You get a term sheet, something that kind of dictates all the terms. And then after that, you'll build a shareholders agreement and investment agreements that will kind of define everything about how the money goes in, how the company is managed, et cetera. Once you kind of agree on this, in this due diligence process is kind of ongoing. We'll look more at that in a moment. But there'll be, depending on how big you are and how big the money is, there'll be some layer of kind of business due diligence, legal due diligence, financial due diligence. You know, in pre-seed cases, often this is like a day of just sitting down with the founders and going through contracts and talking about the business, you know, looking at any of the kind of company foundation papers, et cetera. But if you're talking about hundreds of thousands, millions, then it'll take more time, you know, several weeks anyway. And then finally the funds released. So yes, this is in a vacuum, the kind of linear approach to fundraising. But if you sit back in the beginning and say, I'm going to do this now 100 times with different investors, you can imagine how time consuming and frustrating it gets as a founder, that you're just thinking of your process in this linear dimension with 100 different players that are going at different speeds, have different layers of desire for the investment, et cetera. So while this is a good kind of process, it should not guide your strategy of fundraising. So what I use for fundraising is what I call the fundraising model canvas. It's a total knockoff of something that you've seen probably before, hopefully. And if you haven't, you should see it soon. It's called the business model canvas. And so you may, if you're anything like me, I saw the business model canvas first time in 2009, 2010. Actually, Steve Blank came to Finland and he kind of went through the logic of the business model canvas. But what struck me, you know, when I was frustrated with, actually my frustration is I have so many companies that are different stages of fundraising. I wanted to come up, you know, I started thinking, I said, hey, you know, we could use this as a tool for thinking about the fundraising process. So let me kind of walk you through my thinking here a little bit, and without going into a lot of detail, but general thinking here. So, and I'm just going to look at the right side. So if you've ever worked with business model canvas, this is kind of the value realization side. This is a value creation side. We're going to think about first the first thing we think about, you always need to think about, is how much money do you need? And that's an interesting question, because and I always put it in two dimensions. The first thing is, how much money do you need now to get you through your next critical milestones in the company? So if you're working on your MVP, how much do you need to get to the kind of to, you know, get your MVP totally finished? Then how much do you need to get to the first customer ship? How much do you need to get to kind of scaling, internationalization, whatever? You'll have different milestones, but in general, this kind of amounts to, you know, how many milestones do you want to kind of accomplish in the next 12 to 18 months? How much money do you need for that? So that's the first critical kind of assessment, is how much money do you need now? Second critical thing is, how much money in your kind of best vision of the future do you need before you become profitable in a growing company? So let's say you might need $1 million for, you know, to get through these first few milestones and survive for a year to 18 months. But then, you know, to become profitable, you probably are going to need, you may well need multiple funding rounds. And I, as an investor, am critically interested in your vision of how much money you're going to need over time. There's no right or wrong answer to that. It could be you don't need any more money. You only need the pre-seed and you will get to profitability. That happens sometimes. Or you might need $100 million. So there's widely varying, but this is important to share the vision with your earliest investors, how much money you need now and how much money you'll need over time. Then when you think about the value proposition to investors, you need to think about what benefits do you provide over your competition to that investor, and who is your competition. So we're all very tuned in to our product market or service market competition. That is not necessarily, and usually is not your competition to when you're raising money. You're competing with others going to that investor, and they will have widely different businesses, business models, industries than you're in. So you need to think about why, when you look at an investor, what is it that you bring to the table that's kind of more interesting than everybody else? Because the assumption is that everybody that walks in that investor's door is going to have the 10 times money back kind of message. So that's almost a commodity. And that will be checked clearly as you kind of develop your relationship with the investor. But it's not a differentiating factor. What I think is differentiating is if you can find, if you do your homework on the investor, I'm going to give you some ideas on that in a moment. You do the homework with the investor, you understand what they're looking for, what their experience is, what their skills are, what are the things that they will kind of bring, that they can actually bring to the table to you beyond money. And that's where you start kind of connecting and making them kind of start saying, okay, I'd rather put money in your company than this other random company, even though you kind of look like you're going to have the same, potential success. So that's kind of the first thing. Second is, who are the investor segments you're going to approach? Angels, super angels, venture capitalists, corporate investors, crowdfunding. There are certainly others out there. I'm mainly here talking about equity capital. So I'm talking almost always in Finland, you're going to be thinking equity and grants. So thanks to Business Finland and many others, several others, EU, et cetera, there's often chances to get huge loans and huge leverage for the equity investment. But here we're just thinking about people that you're willing to sell shares in your company to. And so pre-seed and seed level, generally you're thinking angel, maybe super angel. Definition of an angel is in Finland is somebody who's willing to invest up to say 100,000 euros. And then I would call it super angel in Finland, people that are individuals that are willing to invest more. If you go to the US, to, different parts of the world, you'll find very different definitions of that. But in Finland, what you'll see is basically the average angel investor will invest 20 to 40,000 euros in a company, per company. So, if you're raising, for example, raising 200,000 euros, you're going to have to go to multiple regular angels to get that round done, or you find a super angel, somebody who invests more. I'll give some links to Finnish business angel networks, but Finland has one of the best angel networks in Europe, really in the world, I would say, in terms of tools for entrepreneur to help you learn, how to pitch to them. And I'm going to share some stuff with that. But you want to figure out what the kind of segments you want. How do you get your message through them through the first time? And that's where the networking comes in. Maybe it's kind of obvious, but I mean, most deals fail. Most deals fail because the right investor never discovers your company. So how do you reach out and make sure you're visible to the widest audience of angels, VCs, whatever, that have specific interest in your area? That requires research, that requires, physical networking, digital networking, et cetera. So we'll talk some about that, but that is, to me, at the end of the day, what keeps me up at night is I know every company has 5, 10, 15, 20 investors out there that would love to put money into you. But if they don't know you exist, then it never happens. And then once you get, obviously get the message through to the right investors, how do you retain the momentum? How do you keep them kind of moving forward through that linear process I talked to? Because once you get them on the hook, then you're really back into that linear process I showed earlier. So kind of case by case, you're here, but when you're kind of planning your strategy, you're here trying to kind of optimize the whole thing. So I'm going to take about 3 or 4 more minutes in this session. So we'll go a couple minutes over, and then I'll take questions, because I want to go through one example, which is amazing. I think is an amazing example, or a very interesting example, at least, why you want to focus on the actual investor. And I'm going to give you a little math here to think about, and then we'll talk a little bit in the next section about it. And I think I have to actually go off of for a moment off of the So I have to move some stuff around. Maybe I can do it, but I'm just not smart enough. All right, so here we go. So we've got a same case. This is an actual case that happened at Aalto University when we spun out a technology. And Tapio always recognizes this case, but I think it's really, really interesting. So first thing we're going to do is talk about, so basically what happened, this team was of, I think, two founders had raised 150,000 or so of grant money at the university. And as a tech transfer, Topsa and I were actually managing the tech transfer back then. This is 2011, 12, 13. The company was spinning out, keep in mind, two founders, about 150,000 euros of grant money. They built an MVP, basically. It's a web application, not to go to detail about that. We started pitching, and in Finland, to angels. And we found an angel that was ready to invest 50,000 euros to own 20% of the company. So here's the first mathematical concept. Most of you probably already know this, but there's a distinction between pre-money valuation and post-money valuation of a company. So here, if 50,000 euros is going to own 20%, that basically means that the post-money value, the value of your company after the money is in the bank account is 50,000. Sorry about the 50,000 divided by 0.2, or 250,000, right? So 50,000 is 20% of 250,000. So that's the post-money valuation of the company. And then when you calculate what the pre-money valuation is, you just subtract off the money that came in. So the intrinsic value of the investment, the company, was 200,000 euros before the money came in from this investor's eyes. So we were kind of, it was okay, it was interesting, but at the same time, we thought we might be able to get some better bids. So 3 weeks later, the company traveled to the US, was in Silicon Valley. Definitely, I'm not saying this only happens in Silicon Valley, but the differentiation is between a local investor in Finland. Then in Silicon Valley, the team pitched and got to a super angel in the Valley who was ready to invest 1 million euros to own 20%, making the post-money value 1 million divided by 0.2, or 5 million euros, pre-money value 4 million euros. So you've got a huge difference here. So the same company, I don't know why it's like that, same company, same exact idea, to one investor is worth 200,000, and the other one is worth 4 million, 20 times more money, worth 20 times more to this investor than this one, and this one is willing to put 20 times more money in. So 20 times more valuable and 20 times more money. Obviously, we took this investor and sealed that deal and kind of went forward. But the point here is that when you think, entrepreneurs think about the value of your business, you think about other things than, I think most entrepreneurs are surprised that, there can be this 20 times difference depending on who's looking at it. But the difference is simply, this investor actually is a Danish investor, so it was not even a US investor. He was just residing in the Valley at the time. He foresaw a huge market for the product. He was aligned with the founders who also had a large vision, and they agreed that, with 1 million euros, they could grow this company a lot faster and have a higher kind of end potential. So kind of by definition, they sat down and agreed that the kind of application that they've already done was worth 4 million, versus this local investor who's also quite rich guy, but in his mind, he didn't have the same type of a huge vision. So this is why I always get to this, if you don't get to your optimal investor, you may leave a lot of money on the table. That's actually a minor thing, but you actually may miss that huge potential because simply you're not aligned on the same vision. So that's a little bit of math. And again, for any of you that were looking here to do a lot of complicated math, that's not what this is about. But this gives you a little bit of an image why your strategy that you set up back here needs to be able to reach out to a larger audience than maybe just the Turku crowd or Oulu crowd or Tampere crowd or Helsinki crowd. But maybe you should think more in terms of globally, who are the people that, and both people and investors that are interested and find ways to get into that. All right, so that's we'll do this one after the break, but let me stop now for any questions or comments that are there at this point. Understanding it's early, so I'm not going to force you to ask questions, but I'd certainly love to hear if there's some comments or ideas. Great, some quick questions. How many percent should we give out during the first round of funding? It's difficult to calculate value pre-revenue. What are the typical, so let me go to that first. So how much percent? So it varies. So you always have to look at that, how much percentage you're sharing early on with the impact of that investment. In other words, if you can raise enough money to get you forward 1.5 years, 2 years, 2.5 years, then you should be willing to part with more equity of the company, but you should also expect more money. Like this one shows, you know, there are two distinct strategies. If we had done this one, the company had done this one, it would have seen forward 6 months basically and had a slow growth strategy. Here, you know, it had a much longer and bigger uptake, which actually didn't pay off at the end of the day, but that's kind of another story. My thinking is in pre-seed, you know, 5 to 10%, and then after the seed level, maybe another 10%. So if you get to Series A, so that's the kind of first big institutional investment round usually. I like to say, everybody likes to see the founders having still at least 70% of the company. So if you figure out a strategy to get to that Series A, and Series A, the definition of that is basically you've got customers, you've got revenue, you're not profitable yet, but you figured out a model where you can just kind of put money in and create revenue. So that's generally, and ultimately getting to profitability. That's the main way people look at Series A. So percentage wise, you know, first round 5, kind of pre-seed round 5 to 10%, seed round another 5 to 10%, and then of course you probably want to be creating some sort of an option pool for your employees. So that might be another 5 to 10%. So after all of that, you're down as founders down to 70%, investors, employees own 30%. And then you go out and try to raise a large round. So second one, what are typical obstacles for startups when searching for funding? How to secure funding before revenue? So obstacles are mainly, in my opinion, going back to this presentation, I think the biggest obstacles here in this channels to investors, not being able to figure out how to get your message out. And that's complicated because you want it does come to both physical and digital networking. Where in COVID, it's been very hard to do physical networking. So most of the companies that are succeeding now have used, you know, their, you know, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, whatever fits the company is their kind of tools to get out there. But I think, you know, really thinking through, you know, how is my ideal investor going to find out about this? Because if it's up to you reaching out to everybody, you have limited time and resources. You need to be discovered. So I like to think about this much more as a discovery process. You raise yourself up, you get discovered by the right investors. And those are absolutely amongst my portfolio. By far the biggest success comes when the investor discovers you rather than when you're hammering on people's doors. Securing funding before revenue, it's again, can you segment out? So, you know, I'll talk in the second session a little bit more about the finished business angel networks. But I think generally at pre-seed and seed, your best kind of channel to investor groups is through Finnish Business Angel Network. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily at the end of the day, those Finnish business angels are going to be your ideal investor. But if you get out and get visible there, it will help you kind of build some investor buzz around your company. And then it kind of shines, definitely, you know, there are people already in that network from the US, from China, from, you know, Malaysia, from Qatar. I mean, it's actually becoming a really global network. So I think that's, and many investors will, you know, but investors will say very early on, and often even post online if they're VC, whether they're willing to invest pre-revenue or not. You know, I think there's 700 members or so of the Finnish Business Angels, and I'm going to say 200. I'm also in there. I'd say 150 to 200 are willing to come in at pre-revenue. So if you've got a great story and great idea, so it's really about convincing people. I'll answer one more question. We'll take a break and maybe do any other questions that quickly afterwards. How was the funding goal target amount for both by the start? Since they should have asked first, not to get yeah. So how's it? So I think Kagan, you said Kagan asked.
No worries.
Got you. So that's the thing. I mean, as soon as I would like to. Ideally, I would like to get visibility amongst investors before I need the money. And now, in reality, I think, honestly, most startups are always raising money. Maybe sometimes you say that you're not raising money, but if somebody brings, you know, if somebody brings a right deal to the table, generally, I think most startups are willing to play ball. So you know, it is a. I think there's a little bit of a, you know, kind of dichotomy between asking, you know, making sure you ask, but not, you know, maybe asking for something else. So going out, trying to start conversations around the industry, around what the problem you're solving. And then, you know, ultimately, you know, by definition, I think most investors know that you're not coming to them if you're not raising money. And but like I said, I don't think, you know, that conversation, the early conversations are guided by your strategic vision and trying to align that with the investor rather than focusing on how much, you know, necessarily how much money you're raising, what the valuation is, et cetera. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, I think everybody always, me, myself, I need a short break. So let's take 8 minutes now. So it's 9:52. I'll get to the last of these questions and then go through actually, these are great questions leading into the next session. So we'll look at this question a little bit deeper. See you in a few minutes.
We'll do that. So we'll come back by 10:00, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, maybe we will still get those two questions to be answered. It was from Andrea and Marco.
Tommy, is my screen showing?
Yeah, your screen is showing.
All right, it's 10, so good. Perfectly on time. Rarely happens. Good. Okay, so let's finish with just touching those two questions from Andrea and Marco. So you mentioned grants. How well are they accepted from activity-based investors? Also, what's your personal opinion on companies specialized in hunting grants and applying on them on behalf of companies? A great question. Okay, first of all, pre-seed and seed investors, we do like in general like grants a lot. And historical context, 20 years ago, when I was first kind of investing in companies, the grants really had a bad name because they basically were not aligned with business goals. So I feel that Business Finland has done a great job at aligning the goals of their R&D grants and business development grants with those of the founders and investors. So by and large, within Finland, it's a plus. As long as it doesn't become there's a term called grantrepreneurs you may have heard of. So it's like we don't like it. This is why I think it's important is you're kind of looking at getting grants and loans that you also try kind of expand your investor base at the same time. So you get kind of market-driven people behind you as well as just grant-driven. So I've seen certainly I've seen companies that have failed because they focus too much on the objectives of the grants rather than direct business objectives. So short answer is Finnish investors generally like them. International investors also like them if it's pitched correctly. And what I mean by pitched correctly, in my opinion, is again, if you get a round of, in particular, even at seed level or early series A, you get $1 million, 2 million euros. Being able to double that with a grant is a really big value proposition, something that Finland is unique in. It just takes some effort with international investors that are not familiar with the approach. So you have to bring them on a little bit. Companies hunting grants, they're as in everything. So kind of because there's so many grants available, you create this kind of intermediary industry. By and large, I've worked with some that are very good. I've worked with some that I wouldn't work with again. I don't have a strong opinion. Generally what happens is they'll come and they will take, maybe a small retainer and then a success fee. Obviously, I would like to see the success fee component, the main part, and not giving them cash before bringing them on. But I've met a number that I really like, and you can generally tell by the background of the consultant whether it's somebody you can really trust. Twice the runway, 12 to 18 months. Yep. So that's ideal. So the big thing is you don't want to burn, as an entrepreneur, you don't want to burn time raising money when you need to be building the business. And so it's about optimizing that, kind of getting as much money as you can as quickly as possible, right? But not at the same time, not diluting yourself so much. So one of the things that you may have noticed when I look at this, when I showed the point, let me see here. Yeah, this one. So when I showed this, obviously we're talking, in both cases, we're talking about parting with 20%. And that's the only kind of common theme here, is that the investors both wanted 20%. So I think that that it's a little bit how you're planning your strategy, whether you obviously you can burn money quickly and burn any amount of money in 6 months, but I would be generally the 12 to 18 months is really it's kind of a rule of thumb in the industry. So if you target having less than 12 months capital, really it means because it takes, it takes 6 to 9 months on average to raise a significant funding round. So you can imagine if you raise even only 12 months, you're already raising again in 6 months or less. If you raise 18, it's more like 9 to 12 months. But the reality is, you're always going to be raising one way or the other. So I'll get to that in a moment. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah, good. All right. So, but if anybody wants to, let's hold it. So let me get through this next round, and then I think this is a slightly shorter round, so we can have a little bit more Q&A as needed there. Oh, I was actually going to show. I wanted to show first this. So this is this FEBON. FEBON is the Finnish Business Angel Network. And I'm going to talk more about that in the third session, but I just wanted one of the things that it's done super well is collect data. And it actually, Finnish Business Angel Network has a professional staff, which most business angel networks really don't have the benefit of. So they've managed to do some incredible things. One of the things is that this data site, if you go through this whole thing, they will give you, the key figures, investments, valuations, exits, impact, and deal flow. So there are a number of sections, but I wanted to show you a couple things about what to expect from these guys. So first of all, one thing that important for you to understand is you're in an environment that's looked at very with envy across Europe in terms of the amount of capital going into Finnish companies as a percentage of both GDP and per people. So if you look at that, basically Finland and now Estonia are almost in a class by themselves. So if you look at Finland last year, 951 million of total investment in through, so what you can see here is business angels were about 36 million of that. Other Finnish investors were, which I guess this is corporate investors, were 99 million. Finnish venture capitalists were about 223 million. Foreign venture capitalists were about 272 million. And then other foreign investors, being primarily corporate investors, were 271 million. So you've got a really good distribution. So you look here and you say angels, well, that's a relatively small piece of the puzzle. But I would argue that a lot of this other money is driven by companies that have outstanding early investors, angel investors on board. So when you do that seed round, getting a few investors in with good networks of venture capitalists, both in Finland and outside, will really help you get the next rounds. So that's one statistic interesting. If you look at, money's coming across Finland. So Helsinki obviously is where most of it's coming, but Tampere, Oulu, Turku, basically investments coming all around the country. So there's no, if you're located in a remote spot. One of the great things today, in particular, one of the things driven by COVID, is investors realize that, great companies come from anywhere. So you can be from any country, as long as you can get your message out. Nobody cares, honestly, whether you're in Joensuu or Helsinki. It's all about what can you do with what you have. There's a lot of really cool data here that shows kind of, this is kind of where the focus areas are. So you can see business services. This is primarily, I would call business to business or B2B SaaS mostly. So software as a service, but there are also some, kind of other types of businesses. But you can see healthcare. Healthcare is actually the fastest growing, health and med tech, clean tech, lifestyle, et cetera. So a lot of different segments are getting money. I can't really make, so majority of Finnish angels are investing in funding rounds smaller than €500,000. And what you're going to see in a moment is they're generally the business angels are putting in 20 to 40,000 euros. So often you're seeing quite a large number of people investing together to get around up to 300,000 to 500,000 euros. Again, a ton of interesting stuff here, but I wanted to get, so what this shows is almost over half of the deals done by Finnish business angels are done with other business angels. So I can't emphasize enough how social a investing activity, angel investing in particular, is. The thing I wanted to get, so what's a typical valuation of so what's a typical deal look like? And I kind of always hesitate to show these kind of numbers because, this is the median pre-money valuation of companies that with Finnish business angels from 2013 to 2020 was €1 million. So that means, of course, 50% or higher, 50% or lower. If you look at the average is significantly higher because obviously companies that may be IP heavy, where there's been a lot of R&D, et cetera, or where you already have significant traction could be valued. I've seen business angels investing in companies with valuations of 3, 5, 10 million euros. So that happens. But this just says that the median case is about €1 million. This is kind of a little bit looking at, I just don't believe these numbers very well, but they're saying that gaming entertainment, which is probably true, gaming entertainment has been kind of at the high end of the valuation scale, whereas kind of ed tech, retail, other have been lower down. Again, I caution you that these numbers are hard to interpret because I've also seen ed tech companies. I've invested in ed tech companies that have 5, 6, 7 million valuation. So this is just kind of a statistical truth. And then the valuation has been coming up. So 2013, it was median was 600,000. Now we're up in the even a little bit higher. So 2020, actually the median last year, 2020 was 1.35 million. So you can see that the valuation is going up. And then, okay, I'm not going to go in more, but this is a really good place if you want to really think about investment dynamics in Finland. The Finnish, this is actually globally unique data. You can't get this kind of data on in most any country. So Finland's actually been kind of won awards because of its ability to collect data. And I'm going to tell you the pros and cons to that, because it's not all, you as a startup, it's not always positive that people are collecting all this data on you, right? I mean, sometimes you want to kind of keep a lot of data to yourself. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. All right, hopefully that covered the main questions that came up. Now you're going to dig a little bit deeper and just thinking about, okay, we look kind of at process from your side. Let's try to look at what really makes investors tick. One of my favorite subjects. I've done a ton of kind of research on this in different contexts, but this is a good way of thinking about it. So basically, every investor has a set of attributes that they're looking at, and that's where in the third session we'll look at the workbook. That's where I think the workbook helps you kind of diagnose this. This is one of the probably the top 5, top 10 venture capitalists of all time. His name is Tim Draper. And this is old, very old. It says he has 103 investments in 77 companies. I bet he has 1,000 investments through various funds, also directly. So definitely, multi-billion-dollar investor and super successful. He was in Tesla, he was in PayPal, he's in all kinds of, great success stories. So these guys, actually, this was a study they did of his brain, not of his brain, but how he makes decisions. And this, so I want to caution, first of all, this is not, you should not take this as how every investor makes a decision, but what I'm going to kind of argue that every investor has something like this. So if you take, the starting point for Tim is the market big? For Tim, for most VCs, they're looking for a multi-billion-dollar market, like it or not. Now, one thing I always talk about, and again, I want to touch a lot of subjects, but unfortunately can't drill too deeply. That doesn't mean that your initial MPV, as you're going out, your initial target market. So we generally talk about total addressable market, TAM. Then we talk about strategic kind of attainable market, SAM. If you would get all of the customers given your resources, that's the size of your SAM. And then your SOM, your strategic obtainable market, is that market share of that SAM. So it might be 10, 15% of the SAM. So the SAM, your SOM might be 50,000 or 20,000 for your initial product. But as you grow, as you expand, you will reach out to a market that's bigger. And that's if you're going to go to venture capital in general, in particular, if you go to for top tier investors like this, you have to talk about multi-billion-dollar markets. I don't think that's anything new to anybody. But for Tim, that's the first thing he looks. He looks at the company. Is the market big enough? Multi-billion. If not, toss it away. If so, he's going to go to the next kind of thing. Can you make big margins? So again, this is a little bit qualitative, but generally people want to see you getting kind of significant gross margins. So this is where we start talking about unit economics. As you build up your business, what percentage of that revenue are you going to be able to take out to pay down your fixed costs and ultimately make a profit? So he really wants to look into kind of the business model at this point, and do you have a shot at having great margins? Next, only third is the team. So generally, I'd say 70-80% of investors tend to be team driven. So team first, then idea, then market, whatever. These top tier guys like him tend to think about other stuff first, because they think if they can find a great idea with a great market, they've made so many investments, they can take a team and put it in there to do that. So that's a little bit of a risk when you're pitching ideas to major investors. Absolutely, first of all, they'll never sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. So you always have to be a little bit careful about what you share. Now, that said, you won't get very far with most investors until you share a significant amount. So that's really a balancing act. But for him, he's looked for the team next, find people smarter than you. Does he believe that you can get market share that's partially driven by all of the prior things? Can you mix that team with the market and the business model to get a significant market share? This is interesting, actually a very interesting point here that gets ignored sometimes. But investors are scared. If you talk about a $1 trillion market and getting 1% of that, that's something investors do not like to hear. They'd much rather see a $100 billion market where you get 10%. In other words, there's a little bit, like I said, there's a rule of thumb that you want at least 30% ownership, or at least 70% of ownership by founders before doing Series A. There's also a rule of thumb that kind of most companies within their SAM, their strategic addressable market, we'd like to see you talking about kind of 10 to 30% market share. So on the current resources you get in this round, that you can go in there and grab 10 to 30%, because that seems like you're making an impact in that market. But it's not so much, it's not 90%, because then it becomes unrealistic. But that's what this is always a balancing act as to how you define your market. And I think sometimes startups make as a kind of an overreaction to the market sizing. They create such a huge addressable market in their deck and their communications, and that their growth patterns look, even while it's really high, you're still talking only points of a percent. So this is it's a balancing act. And granted, if you're a business to consumer model, absolutely, then you're probably can look at kind of single digit market shares. But in particular, if you're doing anything B2B, B2G, whatever, generally you want to kind of focus on that 10 to 30% market share, in my opinion. Then, of course, he's looking, do you have partners? So do you have people, companies, individuals, organizations that will speak on your behalf, that will say that you're a great company, your product is great. So this is the kind of next thing he looks at. Then basically kind of this big picture, all this put together, can you become number one or number two in the market that you're addressing? And then if he believes that, he makes an investment. So that's kind of again, a look at one investor's brain. I think my opinion, it's a flawed brain, but I can't argue with his success. If you look, he's done, he's literally made tens of billions of dollars in VC. So obviously he's doing things right. I'll show you how I look at things in a moment when we look at that workbook. But again, he's interesting, and to this point, so I want to make a link back to this strategy of making sure you get to the perfect investor. This is actually one of our teams that spun out of Alto back in the day, ISI, you might have heard of them. A group of students actually formed in my class that I taught in 2011. Nobody would have dreamed that they would get access to Tim Draper, or this kind of massive global investor at that point. But they not only got investment from Draper Fisher, which is one of their funds, but they also got awarded the most innovative portfolio company in 2017. And I always kind of look back at this. So anybody, Rafa is kind of a young master's student when he started this project, again, with nothing, very little but the clothes on his back, basically. I think he's Polish, he was here from Poland. And now the company's raised, I think, $800 million, and it's literally, growing, it's on fire. So no matter your beginnings, if you have kind of a big enough vision, you can run out and get this type of a major investor. And when you do that, just keep in mind, this is kind of their mindset. Yeah, so to understand the fundraising kind of value proposition of the investor, this is the classic kind of empathy design thinking slide. And I always say, if I am on a fundraising mission, so in other words, if I'm doing a kind of a roadshow or whatever, I would like to have it not to only be one founder. I'd like to have at least two people, ideally two co-founders, but also maybe somebody else on the team in all of those meetings, because I feel that often if you're by yourself, and I definitely fall victim to the same thing. If I'm by myself, I get focused on my pitch and I'm not absorbing the messages that the other side of the table is giving me. And so if you have somebody else with you that's trying to understand, kind of get the body language of that investor, kind of and steer the conversation, because I think as an entrepreneur, that's one of the kind of fundamental talents you need to develop, is to be able to read the other side of the table, move your pitch in a way that kind of goes towards where you see that investor wanting. It means a lot of homework. Again, I'm going to show you a little bit about that moment. But it also really a deep thinking about having empathy for what the investors are looking for. And to that point, they're looking for returns. They're looking for social value of having investing in a company that is consistent with their own values and beliefs. Now, I'm not only saying, today, kind of environmental, social governance, ESG, a lot of investors go on, have a big ESG policy or impact policy. But that's not only for those investors, it's also for people that are purely doing business processes or consumer whatever. You want to just find investors that align with your vision and understand how they're feeling, and try to build your pitch into their approach. So I think this kind of design thinking from a kind of a fundraising standpoint is really important. Let me now start getting a little bit more specific, and I'll do one more, and then we'll go into the fundraising model into the workbook. So another critical aspect is the lead investor. So a typical problem to a startup's fundraising process is, you got a lot of investors that are pretty interested and say, well, if you're raising 300,000 euros, if you get to 250,000, or I'll put in 50, or I'll put in 20 or whatever. So you get a lot of passive investors saying, yeah, this is good, but then you don't find that active, excited lead investor. So in general, most rounds are going to have one investor that will have both the kind of majority make a significant part of the investment, as well as kind of take the intellectual lead. So really dig in, understand the business. So the interesting thing is, what does an investor look like, lead investor look like? It's somebody that actually you don't have to end up pushing, that they're actually pushing you. So and that's, now that's really lucky when it happens. When you feel that, you're already in a small class of of startups, because again, in general, the pre-seed rounds, like someone mentioned earlier, when you're pre-revenue, don't really have a complete product, definitely is going to be a lot of you pushing. But eventually, get somebody on the hook, they will push you for data, for information. So in my kind of, what does a lead investor look like? It looks like somebody that really has that budget. When you're selling your product, you're always looking for who has the budget, right? Who has a decision-making capacity. You're looking for somebody that has a budget, meaning they're ready to invest, and they can drive a decision either as an individual, as an angel investor, or within a partnership as a venture capital investor. And then, so like I said, a lot of, at least half of the rounds get stuck without a lead investor. So again, you go out, you're just telling the story, I've got all this money, but I don't have the lead investor. Generally, the lead investor, is a rule of thumb, is going to invest 25 to up to 50% of the capital required. There are definitely exceptions to this. For example, if the angel doesn't have that much capital, so maybe if it's a 300,000 euro round, maybe they're going to invest 10 or 15,000, but they really want to take an active role. They know the business. They simply don't have the net worth of a larger investor. Sometimes it makes sense to bring that type of a kind of an angel on early, work with them to build out your message and reach out to the investor community. But by and large, once you get to a substantial pre-seed or seed round, so when I say substantial, in the hundreds of thousands or millions of euros, you're looking for investors that can potentially do 25 to 50%. Once you really get to that 50%, investors are like, I don't know, lemmings or whatever, that they follow. There's a big FOMO that hits, fear of missing out. So once there's a lead investor with, that's ready to put significant amount of money in, you find a lot of people coming out of the woodwork that are willing to put money in because they just don't want to miss out. So that's a big benchmark when you can get kind of half of that capital up. Rules of thumb in Finland, pre-seed stage is less than €1 million. If it's a pre-seed stage company, meaning no customers or significant customers yet, a unfinished but promising product, with a less than €1 million need, usually you're looking at the angel community. At 1 to 5 million, that's more like a seed round, and that's going towards VCs. But there are a lot of VCs. If you're hot, then a lot of VCs still want to come in at a pre-seed level. So I wouldn't just only focus on angels, because again, sometimes your home run will be getting in a VC. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. The lead investor really helps to direct traffic. So they come on, they commit, they say, yes, we're in. It's no more of this, well, if somebody invests, I'll put money in, or if you get this much money, I'll put in. It's more like, okay, my money's ready, I'm ready to go, let's get everybody else. And they're rallying people. This is a great video if you get a chance. It's a dense video, but it's good. I'm not going to show it. But this is actually a key thing, how to distinguish between a lead investor and just a follower. So if you take down the deck, you'll be able to see that. All right, so the last section is this, but what I want to do now is go to this workbook that you have access to already, and I want to walk you through what that looks like. You're welcome to do whatever you want with it, but my advice is actually to go and copy it. God, how many windows do I have open? Okay, here we go. let me get my distractions out. So, all right, so this is, I see that at least some of you have gone in there, but let me give you a, I'll give you a, what I ask is again to, I don't think I can, sorry. So here, I'm putting in the chat the link to this. And like I say, I think it's, hopefully you only have viewer, but you can download it. Let me just show you what this is about. So let me raise the size a little bit. So this will hopefully pull some of the stuff I've been talking to together. All right, so so first of all, I have the fundraising model campus here, the first thing, which again, so what I like to do here is in kind of one-to-one workshops with companies, really think through what these, how to fill in these boxes. And I only talked about these here on the right hand, but these are equally important. So where, how much time and effort are you willing to invest? What other tools do you need? We'll talk about some of that in a minute. Can you get some partners in that are aligned with you that will help you raise the money? That is so often, so just getting to an earlier point, that some of the organizations that will help you get grant money will also help you get equity money, or at least they claim to. Some of them are capable. Generally, just as a rule of thumb, if bringing those guys in, the way I think about fundraising is if you're raising hundreds of thousands of euros, at least 10% of the money you raise is a cost of raising money. So kind of the gross margin on your fundraise is really 90%. 10% you need to invest either as your own time, your own effort, getting tools yourself, or sharing with multiple different parties. And as you can see, in the kind of rule of thumb in fundraising markets, it varies, but 3 to 7% is how much generally fundraisers charge, often with kind of a minimum level. And honestly, it's one of those things that if you end up with the money in your bank account, you're super happy to pay that. So in general, it's paid on the back end of the transaction, so it's a success fee. If they don't get it, then you don't want to pay it. So that's why generally you try to minimize any upfront costs. A lot of these players I've seen are willing to work. Many of them, if they really believe that they're able to get you money, many of them are willing to work for very little at the beginning, 500, 1,000, 2,000 euros to get going, but then that they get a 5% or 6% fee for the money raised. And that's really an international number. If you look for companies that go public on the stock markets in the US, generally 7% is the amount they pay. And then of course, you also have to potentially get an auditor or a lawyer or whatever to help you as well. So thinking about the key activities that you're going to undertake, key resources you need to help you, very important. And then thinking about, again, it is an investment from your side to undertake undertake a fundraising process. So this is again somewhat conceptual, but at the same time, if you some ideas and conclusions that you didn't have before. So that's kind of the first tab. Second tab is really digging into the persona of the investors. So decide who your investor target persona is. So first of all, you're going to have to think about, of course, what how much money you're going to raise in this round. And like I said, generally that's going to correspond to 12 to 18 months worth of work. I like to think about my dream syndicate. So who are the people globally? If I could handpick the people to provide that capital, who would they be? People, organization. Then I think of, so I often kind of put some names here. Then here I will kind of look, okay, what is investment stages of those investors looking at? What types are they? Again, angel, super angel. areas of expertise? What are the kind of, again, investors also, I know it's not very obvious. I mean, sometimes it appears that investors are very stupid. Sometimes they are, sometimes we are. But oftentimes they also have kind of real things to bring to the table. So what would you like more than money from investors? And that's actually a key issue at the end of a you know, I always ask a startup if I'm kind of pitching, or they're pitching to me, I'm wondering, what is it that you're looking for from an investor? And that's a tricky question, because sometimes some investors want to be passive and they don't have the time and effort to put in. Sometimes they want to be very active. So the more that you know about the investors are better. But again, this is just kind of at a high level. What are the attributes you'd like to look at from investors? Whether they're passive or active, their ticket size, how much money they might have, their geographies they're focused on. You know, and then what do we think that investors want and need to see from us? Is it traction from existing, you know, how much funding have you raised already? What have you done with it? That's a big thing. How big the market is, you know, your competitive advantage, strategic positioning. This expands out. I'll show you some more ways to look at that in a moment. So these are just kind of examples. And then, of course, at the end of the day, I think investors are driven by two things: fear and opportunity. So fear can be, you know, the fact that, you know, of the unknown, what can happen to you tomorrow that will make you irrelevant. So what are the things that can fail? So thinking through answers to these questions is really important. But also they're driven by FOMO, so fear of missing out. That's the biggest fear. And so once you can start establishing some FOMO, that you've really got, you know, the company's growing, you've got investors coming in, they'll come by. I just gave a couple models here of a way to track. So I really like, actually, I'll go here to the metrics. I really like thinking about, you know, if you're starting a process, think month by month going forward, you know, really 2 to 3 months is a period that you're really getting new contacts. So really sit down, okay, how many new investor leads do I want to get in the next week, in the next month? So you really write that out and then start tracking that and see if you make it, you know, so first of all, the more people you can get involved from your team, the better, in my opinion. It requires a single point of contact. Generally, the founder / CEO is going to take the lead. But having more people in, the more you can kind of gamify it and get people to kind of challenge each other to bring more leads in, the better. But I love to track this stuff, really understand, you know, how many people have said no, why have they said no, what have we learned? And that's basically, you can get that out of this. So that basically the metrics here are just summarizing that CRM. So here's a list actually of the current, in there, I've got a couple lists of current finished venture capitalists. So this is, well, so these are all of, and I have early stage relevance. So if you look here, I would say all the ones here are relevant investors from a pre-seed and seed investor standpoint, or sorry, pre-seed or seed entrepreneur standpoint. So here you can read what their focus areas are, what their investment strategies are, their website. I took this from CB Insights, which is kind of a big analyst company. So they have some statements on what their strategy is, when they were founded, how many portfolio companies, how many lead investments they've done, very interesting thing, how many exits they've done. So these are attributes that are interesting to know about, that kind of determine whether they might be the right fit for you. So I advise first doing homework, which of the kind of finish, and then, you know, you can use some links I'll show you in a minute to look internationally if there's some international investors get involved. I also kind of noted here something amazing thing in Finland since, well, okay, so maybe if I go from 2000, let me just say a lot of funds have been raised here in Finland for early stage and venture. When ventures generally a little bit later stage, but a lot of new funds, significant size. So these typically venture capital funds run anywhere from 40 million to 150 that are focused on early stage investors. So a lot have been created here. I'll show you some links how to find them in a minute. Then I just did a list of deals that have been done in Finland recently. I just pulled this last night, but a huge amount. If you add up it's over €1 billion worth of investments into Finnish companies so far this year, and we're only through 9 months, basically 9.5 months. So it's going to be a record year again. Now the truth here is here you can just look at this at your leisure, but I say how big the reported rounds are. So some of them are small. So this one, who was this? Panda Training just closed a €620,000 round. At least that's what was announced. But then Ivan just yesterday closed 60 million. I thought it was bigger. But anyway, they're widely ranging rounds. A lot of really big rounds. The smaller rounds are also happening very, very regularly. If you look at the investors, they tend to be, so Lifeline Ventures, for example, is one of the really top investors, really globally, but in particular in Finland and in Europe. They did an investment here of 1.22 million euros, 1.2 million into a company called Huva. Don't know who they are, but again, this goes to the point that if you just look at Lifelines, it looks like a huge fund making big investments, but they also make very small ones, or reasonably sized ones as well. So you can never say never about what the size investors are willing to put in. Then I have some things I'll go through in the next session around what are the things that in the end, what are the questions you're going to get from investors. I have actually a long list of a full kind of due diligence questionnaire here that's also helpful for thinking through early. I have a set of blogs that have really interesting links. This actually has a number of links of investors in Europe. You might have to ask me for access, I'm not sure, but we'll talk about that later. And then actually some really good descriptions of the fundraising process also. And then finally, I'll get to a couple of things about valuation. So, hey, I've just covered a ton of stuff in 42 minutes. Let's go to the questions. And I'll wrap this up in the next section because I'll spend a little bit more time here to tell you what you're looking at. But let's start with, so Carol, funding requires a lot of paperwork. When should we start creating contracts? So here's what I do. Can I show you this? I'll show you what, I can't show you the whole, what's inside it, but I will show you what I start creating early on. This is for one of my companies called Meal Logger, which is a wellness, kind of a nutrition and weight loss company. And we're going to look at the data room we create, and I'll answer your question. So I'm not going to go into the data room, but I am going to say, here's what I always do. I create what basically, usually in Google, but sometimes in Dropbox and others, I'll create a set of folders, and I'll start capturing everything. So the existing shareholders agreements here, the current marketing material, the deck, any, if there's a 1-page or whatever, financial statements, financial forecasts, cap table. So what's the ownership structure? In this case, we're actually going to pitching to Finnish Industry Investment, or FESI, which is a big public co-investor. So there's some documents there. So that is, in this case, we're doing a convertible loan. So we have a convertible loan document. We have a due diligence report that I do. And then we have research. So in the research, I'll go in and pull data on different competitors. And then in the end, and then the key employment contracts. So one thing I've learned the hard way is to be very to understand very well the contracts that are being made between the company and the employees and the founders. So I think so you want to make sure that you have those out there. But to your point, to Cato's point, so the question is, generally, one thing you have to determine is are you going to do an equity round or are you going to do a convertible note round? And then there's another variant of that called SAFE. So it's kind of like a convertible note. So, my advice is, first of all, there are templates out there of standard series. It's called Series Seed. If you look, I think I have a link in the workbook somewhere. But there's a set of kind of model documents. So I strongly advise pulling those down early and reading what a convertible loan looks like, what a shareholders agreement, what an investment agreement looks like, what are the documents I'm going to have to start producing. But I would not, it depends on the investor whether you do the doc preparations or they do. So a strong lead investor generally is going to drive everything. They have their templates and they will kind of provide those to you. There's another philosophy that says, okay, I'm going to have everything ready and I'm going to drive that conversation with my own documents. If you want to spend time doing that, sometimes that's effective. In particular, I've seen when you have a hard time getting a really strong lead investor, it helps to actually start circulating kind of model agreements. In general, the agreements are, well, term sheet is generally the first thing. Honestly, I think the term sheet is becoming less and less relevant these days. Companies are going straight to final contracts. Generally, often a term sheet is just an email that says, we're willing to pay X or price per share for however many shares, and then some other conditions. But I'm waffling around this question. I think it's the more that you can do early on, the better. The earlier you address, honestly, I'm a big believer in having a friendly lawyer helping you with that, giving you a rundown of all the documents you need, because there's not only, within here, there's also the founding, the articles of association, all the stuff that you initially kind of filed with PRH that you'll have to have in here too. So advise you to engage a lawyer. Lawyers also will generally work pretty cheap early on with startups. And I'm sure all of the, Business Tampere and Turku and Oulu, you probably have preferred resources and tools around that. So strongly advise working with them as early as possible. But, generally, I honestly don't start paperwork until I really have a pretty strong signal that somebody's actually moving. Because once an investor's ready to go, you don't want to slow the process. You don't want them to wait on you. So I strongly advise kind of putting together this kind of a data room as early as possible. Figure out what you're missing, and then start going. How does due diligence actually work? Can we prepare something? So good. I actually answered. So this is it. And there's different approaches, and then the one thing I really love to do is do an index, because again, like I say, investors tend to be a little bit lazy. But if I can come in here and actually give them links into each
Did we lose Will now? At least to me, we don't have him here.
Yeah, same.
Okay, yeah, thanks for confirming.
So
Yeah, let's hope that he can get back online. Anyhow, we were coming to the break soon, so let's hope that he can fix it.
Also, this is Tapio. I'll just add on Will's comments about the data room. There are also commercial platforms for organizing and managing a data room. And there are some providers who basically give you the data room platform to be filled in for free. You don't pay anything for putting your materials there, and they only charge something if you give a link to investor for the data room. So that's also one option. Of course, the Google Drives and Dropboxes are the easy and more or less free alternative. But if you want to look a little bit like more, let's say, a professional approach on the data rooms, there are also those available.
Have no idea what happened there. Do you guys hear me?
We can hear
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
No worries.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're right at break anyway. I don't know exactly what happened, but let's take a break. I'll continue just with that, and then we'll have a longer wrap up in the last section. That's okay. Tommy?
Sure. No
I think
worries.
you're on mute.
That- So
Sorry, I
we'll
can't hear you anyway.
we'll get back by 11:00.
Oh yeah, good. Great. All right.
Cheers.
See you soon.
Thanks. Cheers.
was weird. Okay, I think I'm back.
Welcome back.
Good to have you.
Yeah, so I'm coming to you from Espal, and my neighborhood was the last one in, I think one of the last ones in Espal without fiber. So they've chosen today, in the last couple of days, there's the days to dig the fiber in. And so they're digging all around the house. I'm using 5G here, but then there's also a tremendous storm. So hopefully we get through this last hour okay. But apologies for that.
Hello, my name is Elias. Thank you for the session, William, so far. It has been great. A quick question.
Yes.
We are on pre-seed stage, and I'm interested, how do you make an evaluation of your project in such an early age when you don't have any, or you don't have a lot of sales?
Yep.
So, yeah.
Okay, super question. And I'm going to go back to the arts, philosophy and whatever. So I'm going to show, actually, if we go back to if I'm going to share here. So first of all, audio okay now? Okay, good. So, and I'm sharing. So, right. So here's how I do it. And here's how we do it in my firm. And I think this is the way most venture capitalists do it, one way or the other. Now, everybody has a different, like I showed you the brain. So they're different brains of venture capitalists. And so here's a good example of one. So if I look at how our brain works as a firm and also as an individual, I actually do use this. It's a tool that's been created by an organization in US called Seraph. And it's basically, let me make it a little smaller. So the idea here is, and this is very important, this gets to my original point about why you need to think about not only how much money you need now, but how much money you're going to need over time. Because basically, I'm going to look at three things. I'm going to look at the current deal environment. So I'm going to look at the current deal environment. I'm going to look at the financing requirements going forward. And I'm going to look at the exit potential of your company. And I'm going to basically every company that I look at, I effectively go through this checklist of it's 36 different attributes. And it's in here, it's the number 11, the Seraph Val. And so I think this is a superset of every factor any investor is ever going to be able to look at, wants to look at. The reason it's arranged like this is because what I'm effectively interested in three time periods. I'm interested in what the market is like now. I'm interested in what's going to happen once my money's in until we exit, basically. And then I'm interested in what's going to be going on in the market when the exit happens. So when I teach this from a financial perspective, I always talk about discounted cash flow, and the true value of any company is the expected value of the future cash flow discounted back to present based on the risk level. The problem is, for a startup, you have no idea what the future revenues are. You have no idea what the future costs are going to be, and you have no idea how risky it is, right? So all these ideas of building a spreadsheet, of forecast through 10 years or whatever, and then discounting all that back and coming up with a value, it's a pipe dream. You can't do it. But I'll talk about, you still need to forecast, but you can't really use that for valuation. So what we do, but generally as venture capitalists and angels or whatever, is we look at a bunch of different factors that we think are correlated with the current deal environment, with what's going to be happening, what's going to determine how much future financing you need and how much exit potential. So, and this is a lot of stuff. So you can think, and sometimes it's not, there's no necessarily right or wrong where you take all these factors and put them. But for example, margin levels important for the financing requirements, because if you've got high margins, you're probably going to need less future venture investment. So that makes me happy, right? As an investor, I put my money in, you're going to need less other investor money in. So I will keep my percentage pretty close. Same is if there's early exit potential, if you have like some good partnerships that, if the market doesn't evolve like we like, could possibly sell the company in a few years, that also gets to requirements. And you can look at all of these, and all of these basically are elements of a business model, right? So what I do is I look at every company, and I start out, obviously, when I first meet you, I can't figure out all of this stuff. But by the time I make an investment, I do want to rate you. And basically what I do here is rate everybody from 1 to 10, 1 being worst, 10 being best. And I basically use this kind of average level to help me figure out, actually, if I average all these together, I get 5.8. Generally, when I'm making an investment in a company, I want this to be at least 6, 7, 8. So everybody has their own kind of way of looking at it. But you always have to keep this in mind. You can be a perfectly good company, but still not be an attractive investment target, because only a small fraction of companies get investments. So you have to find, so my advice from this, I love this from a sense that it's complicated, but it's a superset. And by the way, the links that are in here are really excellent. So you can go into each of these, and there's a little blog post about that gives background on at least one way to look at that particular attribute. But what this helps me do is to make sure I don't miss anything. So I will go in, I'll kind of throw this model at everybody. I will kind of throw away, I look at about 500-600 deals a year, and I think that's quite common for early stage investors. So I will only, bring forward probably 1 or 2 in 10 companies to a next meeting. And those are generally ones where, again, first meeting, maybe I've only filled out 3 or a handful of these factors, but I found something that's really amazing in it. Like in this case, I don't remember, but what this particular case was, but if it had some outstanding attributes that, really great go-to-market strategy, or, the lead investor is highly credible, somebody I'd like to go in with. These are the kind of things that will push me forward. So, I mean, to your point, I do look at forecasts, so I'm definitely going to always sit down with you at some point and look at, what do you think revenues are going to be this year, next year, following years? What are expenses? What are customer acquisition costs? What's the lifetime value of customers? So I'll definitely look at all of that stuff. But that's more after I've kind of made this qualitative look at a company to see if I want to go forward. Do you want to follow up on that, or is it does that help, or do you want to ask again more specifically?
Yeah, I think this helps. As I understood, there is no correct way of evaluating your company, and it's more about talking and speculating.
It is in what I encourage you to do. So anybody that says that there's one answer is just wrong. But what I have implied, what I tried to do in this workbook is give very well kind of like, here's a good post on Y Combinator's approach to evaluating companies. Here's one. There's a company called Deal Room out of Belgium that has different factors. So there's my advice is, every investor has their own set of factors, and this is something you can do early on, and even in the beginning of a meeting, or even in a pre-meeting email. Ask the investor, what are the key things that you want, you as an investor want to look at. And again, they're widely varying. And like I said, the other important thing about having something like this, a framework, is it allows other people in my firm. So we all review the same companies. We go back and we look and see where we disagree. Like sometimes I'll say, I say it's 8, meaning really easy. This should be easy to grow the revenue. maybe my partner says it's a 3. And then we want to, maybe we agree on 90% of the stuff, but we disagree on some things. And then we kind of try to figure out, why do we disagree? We go back to you and say, okay, help us with, we have disagreement on this attribute. And but yeah, I think the most important takeaway here, I really believe in this thinking about, what's going on now, what's going to go on between now and when we exit, what do we think is going to be going on when we exit. And again, it's highly variable, and the future is unknown, but it's helpful to kind of go through that way. The other thing, I like this. So Tapsa, I think our Tapios was talking about the commercial due diligence platform. So I showed a little bit. I actually had to reboot, so I lost my DD folder. But I think Tapio called on the phone, and he made an important point, which is the due diligence process is really a place for you to show your professionalism. And so while I showed a set of Google Docs, it's much better to use a professional approach, or if you're using Google Docs, that's fine too, but do it in a way that is restricted. So again, because once we're actually interested, we're looking at everything you do as a signal about the way you're going to do business, the way you're going to manage our money going forward. So I didn't hear what Tapio said, but I can imagine he was pointing to a few tools. I think it's really important to be able to do that professionally. And the second thing you get out of that, I assume, in that platform or most platforms, is you can see if the investors opened what you've done, what you've given them. Huge tell on the investors' motivation level is how quickly they dig into what the stuff you send them. So, it's great. So unfortunately, if you do a Google Doc, there's plenty of security issues that might be there at the end of the day. But the other thing is you simply don't get any insight into whether investors are actually moving forward, going through the process. Generally, by the time I get to my due diligence, we've already agreed with the founders what the terms are going to be. And then, more or less, what I do is I do it was generally a 20 to 30 page document, Word or Google Doc, where I basically go in and interview founders and other key team members and try to come up with answers to all of these questions. Because that as a lead investor, which I generally am, it gives me the ability to actually share your thinking with the other investors, as well as my thinking. Often exit strategy becomes to be a key component. Now, another common question from founders is, should I talk about the exit strategy? And as always, there are multiple schools of thought on that. The thing you always have to be aware of with angel or VC is generally we never expect to we expect to put money in now, maybe put more in later, and then get one big payoff in the future when you either sell the company or do an initial public offering. We don't expect to ever, for example, get dividends or interests or whatever. We're going to get, we're going to put money in, we're going to get money at the end of the line. So we're very interested in what's the exit potential of your company. Now, as a founder, it's a tricky question because we don't want to see you focused on exits, right? We want to see you focused on building the business. However, at least personally, I always wanted to sit down with you and say, who do you think are the most likely acquirers? Why are you disrupting an industry to the level that somebody is going to be motivated to buy you? Because again, just being a nice, profitable, reasonably growing company, that's a license to a good but not great exit. The license to a great exit is that you're really disrupting and making the existing players play differently. So I always like to hear that, what are those scenarios where the big, those big robust players are fighting to get you. That's actually when I sold my company in 2010. I sold a software company, and we had two companies fighting over us. And that was actually what drove the valuation of our company at the end of the day. We had a couple million of sales, a little bit of profits, reasonable growth rate, but we had a very strategic product for actually what we thought are 3 or 4 different players. We went to all of those. 2 of them decided that they really wanted us. We were able to play those off of each other and really doubled the valuation of our exit based on that, strategic discussion between potential competitors in the market. So, but what I love about this is I can, like I said, I think in dashboards, so I can look at here immediately and see here are all the kind of issues that I'm going to have to answer to when I'm raising money. And granted, a lot of times investors are only going to go through a handful of these. But the thing is, you never know which handful are the ones that are most important to the investors you're talking to. So it's always much better to be able to really kind of look at it across the board, have decent answers to all of these. Maybe another kind of hint in the due diligence process is the more that you can help the investor, the better. So like we're doing one right now, and the team, the finance, it's a small team, 12, well, actually 15 people. So a reasonable size for, this is a seed investment we're going after. But they prepared out the data room very completely. And the investors basically didn't have to do anything but go in there, start reviewing documents, start asking questions. The nightmare is where the investor has to keep asking you, say, well, why isn't, you have 30 employees, or you have 10, 15 employees, why are there only 11 employment contracts here? Okay, well, that's a signal that you're not thorough. So anything that you can do to make sure you're as thorough as possible, and then to top this point, use those platforms that give you kind of insight into how to do what are the key things to look at. So let me I'll land the plane now with the last section, and then I think, well, there are only several slides here, but I really wanted to talk a little bit about the material. So to your earlier points, it gets a little bit to the due diligence, but my logic with due diligence is, by the time you get into due diligence, you're 70–80% of the way towards an investment, and you have to handle that well. Like I said, you have to be professional. But I would say much more likely optimal deals, the best deals are lost because you've not handled investors right in early phases. So I'm answering more the question is, what do you need early on? So first thing is, we're talking about kind of setting up a fundraising process. The best deals I've ever done have come out when we weren't raising money. So actually, when we do a great press release about a new customer, or a Twitter post about some milestone, the 1,000th user or whatever it might be. But investors are tracking this stuff. So the best investors have their crawlers out all the time, and they have analysts working that are actually contacting customers and looking for exceptions. So they're looking for companies that kind of show up on their radar screen that they can get access to before everybody else does. That's the way Finnish investors work, and that's the way global investors work. So I really advise you that once you're ready to start sharing your success stories, get a social media plan. In particular now, before it was like, okay, before COVID, it was figure out the 5 best conferences for your sector to go get visibility in. Now, of course, online events are important. Physical events start becoming important again, but it's really highlighted, in particular LinkedIn. So I find LinkedIn being the best driver of inbound investor leads. but also, you know, but if you have visual stuff, Instagram, Twitter, whatever. But just always have hooks out there that you can, that and kind of where investors can pick up and contact you. Because again, best time to raise money is when you don't need it, honestly. The worst time is when you're desperate. And, you know, again, most of what I'm talking about here is when you're not desperate yet, but you realize you're going to have to concretely go out there and raise money. So, so this is the kind of stuff you need. So actually, this is wrong. This is now Dealum. So I'm going to show you these platforms, but there's a Febon uses a platform called Dealum, which is where you can post your profile, and Febon will review it and look into potentially bringing you in to pitch to angels. So I'm going to give, there's some links here in a moment, but so having a one pager, very important. Again, investors have, I heard actually one of my partners, actually Bruce Orrick, who's one former ambassador to the US, is one of my partners, or sorry, US ambassador to Finland is one of my partners. And his claim is that the attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. And the human investor is more like 6 or 7 seconds. So you have a very limited time to actually get people's attention. It's a little bit facetious, but having a one pager that's descriptive, again, Dealum has examples for that, is good. Some people, you know, there's just form-based one pagers that are okay. Personally, I'd like to see something visual, a little bit about your brand, or something that's captures my attention a little bit more than just a bunch of bullet points. But having a one pager that describes the company is important. Then I look for, it doesn't have to be 10-page, but a short pitch deck with the problem, solution, competition, stuff like that. So there are, a million examples of those. But a short pitch deck, generally what I get, if a startup's contacting me, I either get a one pager or a short deck. And often, more and more often now, they are in links as opposed to PDFs, but PDFs are just fine. I think people are using PDFs a lot these days. But I generally get an email with this in short explanation of the company, suggesting a meeting. Then ultimately, you either need a full business plan or a long pitch deck, so with a lot of more detail. So this is something that you'll go through within the investor in the second, third, fourth meeting. But this first pitch deck is really something to catch their interest. Financial forecasts are super important. So I have some models also in the links. Generally, what I like to see is a 3 to 5 year forecast of what your optimal vision calls for. So, meaning I just said that we can't predict the future, right? So some people take from that the idea that it's not worth making long-term forecasts. The reason you want to do it is because it helps you get a shared vision with the investor. And so when I see early on, first of all, if I see no financial numbers in terms of forecasts at any level in the initial pitch deck, it's really a turnoff. If it's exciting enough, then I will look further. But I would like to see something that says, okay, we have now sat down. We think that we can be at 10 million in sales in 3 years, or 100 million, whatever your number might be. But the point behind the forecast is it's not that it's something, a truthful document we're gonna make a valuation off of. It's really something where I can press you to explain to me your business model and why you think you can be a leader in the industry. So I'm a big believer in financial forecasts. I'm a big believer, if you're a small team without a CFO, I am a believer in having somebody outsourced to help you with that. If you don't have the talent on the team. I'm also pretty famous for bringing in, kind of master students from the business schools or whatever to help with that. I love working with interns on stuff like that. So anyway, I'm a big believer in the forecast, and I think most investors will ask you to have these forecasts before they put money in. Super important is how you're going to use the money. So that's often a gotcha at the end of the day that okay, we want €500,000 to, do some marketing and R&D. Well, that's not enough. So you want to have a detailed kind of list of the things you're going to spend the money on, and good explanation of why you're going to spend money in kind of one part of the company versus another. So I often the use of proceeds to me are too broad. So you want to be pretty specific how you're going to spend the funding. You definitely want to create a list of target investors. So in the sheet that I've shared with you, there is there's a tool for that, but you can do it however you want it. Honestly, almost all of my companies are doing this with Google Sheets right now. So they're taking one of these models, they're sharing it with their close in, amongst the co-founders, amongst the board members, strategic advisors, or whatever. And they're creating again, they go in and they record when there's a meeting, and they record when, what the responses from the investors are. So they're really pretty sophisticated about tracking that. There are some tools there as well. You probably followed Rundit. There's something called, there are a number of different tools that I've not used a lot, but that's kind of growing as there's SaaS tools that you can record your kind of monthly, actually it's not SaaS tools I'm speaking more towards the kind of investor updates, but you can kind of update your forecasts monthly with actuals and share those with investors through different platforms. So list of target investors, just very important to handle this like any sales process. Manage, reach, you've got prospects, suspects, and just bring them along and be able to share on your team where they stand. And we'll go back to the workbook one more time to kind of look at that quickly. Yeah, then super important is, and I'd say if there's anything that catalyzes a deal more than anything else, is if you have a reference customer, partner, influencer that really believes and uses your product, that's willing to do reference calls with investors early. As soon as I can get beyond your story and start corroborating the opportunity here with multiple outside players that are not necessarily on your team, the better comfort I get that I can actually start my process. So this is, my kind of list of 6 or 7 things that I would create very early. Not necessarily in this order, but you need all of that. Here's some interesting links. This is actually now to deal them, but these are tools that will help you. So like I said, Febon has great tools to help startups understand how to communicate with their investor group. So highly recommend that, kind of looking into these links. Then there's a Nordic guide for finding angels, so kind of more than just the Finnish market, but for the other Nordic. Then there's a couple really good kind of guidelines for startup fundraising. There's a guy named Bill Payne, who's actually the founder of this Gust platform, which is kind of again a place that gathers startups online. And then there's KPMG has a nice reporting guide for what are the kind of financial stuff that you should be looking at and reporting regularly. So these are really kind of high level stuff. I'm going to just kind of get to the last kind of things. This is more of a summary of everything else, but again, go back. I really love this number. So knowing at a high level how much money you're going to have to raise before you're a profitable and growing company. It's a bad, ugly analogy, but I look at it as an entrepreneur and an early investor, that we're basically walking around with a gun to our head until we're profitable and growing, because while you're still losing money, you're still going to be subject to the craziness of the investor markets. Right now, we've got a huge high market where investors are super excited to put money in. Next year, the year after, we don't know. I mean, you know, there can be the economies can collapse, you know, crypto can disappear. Actually, that's really an interesting backbone to the whole availability of finance. The crypto has created a huge amount of new capital. I don't know if that bubble bursts, it's going to actually come back not only to affect crypto related companies, but also normal companies, because there's just going to be less cash flowing around. So thinking about this number helps me say, you know, when I'm my personal is a personal investor, and not so much with my funds, we all have different levels, but I love to see companies that have a way to be profitable and high growth with between 3 and 10 million euros. So if you come and say you need 50 million euros, to me, it's probably, I think it's, I don't have enough money to support that, because what we look at is, if you're a very small investor, this gets, you know, when I looked at ICEYE, for example, very early, the satellite company, I loved the company. It was so perfect. I really wanted to invest, but I knew it was going to need hundreds of millions of euros. I said, that's just not for me. If I can put in 30, 50, 70,000 euros, you know, at the end of the day, I'm going to own 0.0001% of the company. Now, if it's ICEYE, I would have still made out great. I should have done it. But when I looked at it, I said that was my rationale for not doing it. It needed too much capital. On the other hand, there are many investors that have deeper pockets, generally fund investors, that want to see you raise a lot of money. So they want to see you with that 50 million or 100 million. If you're going to Lifelines, if you're going to some of the bigger VCs in Finland, they want to see, you know, you ready to raise more money. So I'll challenge you about that number. That's one of the I've lost on in the past by not understanding by much, like I said, how much you need to get to your next milestones, what they are, what are the characteristics of the ideal investor we already went through, what's your unique value proposition to me as an investor, how do you differentiate yourself from the other players. There's several industries where I know there are 3 or 4 different really good players in Finland. In particular in health tech, I'm really excited about the future of health tech, digital health. There's several players that I'm trying to figure out. I really want to invest in one of those, but how do they differentiate themselves from each other? Then, you know, I like this, you know, if you can, using various tools that, again, your local centers. I think this is one of the great uses of business, of the business centers in Tampere and Oulu and Turku and Joensuu, and I don't want to leave anybody out, but wherever it is, a lot of those can help you identify the kind of who the global investors are that might be in your segment. Or at least help you identify the tools to use to identify those, because they're perfect tools for this, but they're super expensive. Like the tools that I use are tens of thousands of euros a year to actually get a license to. So, but a lot of these kind of regional groups, they take some of those tools and know different ways to hack that. And then, yeah, figuring out the channels to get to those investors. So what are the, you know, granted, you know, who are those potential likely investors, how do they find out about their investments? How can I get into those channels so they discover me? It's because I just don't have the resources to discover every one of those by name, but if I can do my marketing correctly, I'll be able to get there. Here's an example. I think this is Asko Health from a while back. Yeah, I've tried to hide it, not very successfully, so I won't stick here, but just there's an example of a typical one pager. So this is what I like about this is I can sit down in 5 minutes and really get an overview of the company. So doing something like this is great. So when I think of one pager, it's really 2 sides of a page, obviously. And this is in if you choose to fill out the DLM or the Finnish Business Angel Network profile, you'll basically be walked through this. And it really forces you to think about things and putting things in a nutshell. And then this is my last official slide. Then let's do a little Q&A, and I'll just touch a little bit about the workbook. But I really believe I really believe in this. Find ways to bring in people with investor networks. If you don't have it yourself, in particular, this is first-time founders. Second, third-time founders generally have the networks themselves and have to think about this a little bit less, though the smart ones still do this. And what I mean about a community, it's a group. First of all, it's just okay. It's people in your local networks, national networks. But first figure out how to, pick their brains for potential investors. Then if they turn out to be really valuable to you and bring some ideas, think how you can compensate them somehow in the upside. And so I have a case right now that I'm thinking about very specifically, that it's changed the valuation of the company from a couple million euros to, I think it's closer to 30 to 50 million euros. It's a company with 500,000 in sales. But we just got 4 major global influencers in their field to invest small amount of money in the company and take, somewhere 0.2, 0.4% ownership in the company. But they are so influential, they brought in investors that, again, I showed you my example earlier, investors with big visions of what to do with our little company. And they're starting to talk about investing tens of millions of euros when we were originally looking for only a couple million. So bringing in influencers, getting them somehow in your cap table as a very small owner, and hopefully putting a little bit of money on the table. So it's always better if they invest a little bit of money than it's only sweat, but even sweat can be valuable. But that getting those people in that are motivated by something other than just cash is super important. And can be a game changer to your company. So think through that, how you can make that happen, and that can really totally change the outlook of. And getting back to the point I made earlier, it's all about how many milestones you want to cover with your first investment, right? So we showed the example where, there's one case that was going to invest 50,000, one's going to invest $1 million. As a startup, I don't advise you to have multiple stories. You should have one story about here's where we want to go. Here's how much revenue we can get. Here's how early we can get in the market. Here's how much funding we need. But as you start engaging with investors, changing, maybe looking at a slightly bigger vision, then you can start talking about bringing more funding in. And when you bring more funding in, there is a reality that the valuation of your company will go up simply because you're raising more money. So always be kind of trying to bring these kind of people that can help you build out the vision and connect. And like it said in the video, just build community and build interest and get people motivated. I think that's and again, like that gets back to my initial point. Yes, it's science and finance, so you need this stuff like the forecast and whatever. But at the end of the day, the way you build that community around your companies is really going to be important. So that's kind of more or less what I had planned here. Yeah, I think the best thing is so it's 11:40 now. I don't know if this inspired some questions or comments. I'm not currently looking at the chat, but now I'm opening it up.
We do have few, if we have time.
Great. Perfect.
From Hannu, we would have continuing. Actually, no, sorry. We actually probably had even Eva's question right. So how long does the process take for you on average about the due diligence? And from meeting a startup, you want to proceed with seed investments.
Yes, okay. On average, from medium start to, okay, good. As always, I'll give you the first obvious answer, which is it depends. But I could do a little bit better than that. So one thing I really advise on this is so maybe this goes back. Let me share again, and I'll share that original slide about the so if you look at this thing, from initial contacts, it's very funny. So I will say generally a fundraising process takes 6 to 9 months. That's if you really want to look at an average, maybe even a median, I don't know. 6 to 9 months, you really need to start raising that much in advance. Now, that being said, some processes never finish, so it's infinite. And then some processes literally go in a week or 2 weeks. So my fastest was literally first meeting to money in the bank in a couple hours, because that was when I knew either I was in or I was out. So there was already a lot of material for me to look at. I actually looked at a lot of the material. I literally had a time deadline. I simply called my partner, said, we have to be into this deal. I see all the material. I make sure all the checks are crossed, and we do it because there are other major players in there. Okay. So, but to get a lead investor and to go through a process, I think 6 to 9 months is a reasonable process. The reality is it's a very frustrating generally. So I'm assuming if you're super hot and you already have a bunch of investors looking at you, then it can go super quick. So I'm not talking to you lucky few. I'm talking more to the masses, which you actually have to go out and work to build the demand. And I think 6 to 9 months is how far ahead you should think. Then once you get an investor through, let's say this, into this, after, I think it's fair to ask after 2 to 3 meetings, what do you think? How long is it going to take? How much more do you need? When is it likely you're able to move and make a commitment in the form of a term sheet or just an email commitment, whatever, even an oral commitment. And I think that again, this is a process that, most people that you start this with will drop out along the way. But once you get one to say, okay, ready to go, then I think you're more like in the 1 to 3 month process. So that's my kind of big answer there. And then, like I said, investors will always tell you the story. So everybody has a process, but the processes can always be broken if we get excited enough. And like I said, investors, once they get on, they're really kind of gung-ho to get in. So like I said, a question I would ask very early on, maybe not the first meeting because it's a bit too pushy, but at least after the second meeting is, and I think you can even ask in the first one, what is your process? How long does it typically take? Investors will give you broadly different answers. Angels certainly move faster than VCs in general. So that's why at the pre-seed and seed level, I really think it's healthy to try to address both angels and VCs. Duration of the process, how long does the actual DD phase last? So I don't want to say it depends again, so I won't. But so here's the big. So the question is, how long does it take me to really go through and answer all these questions? So I do a leadership assessment, technology, IP, regulatory strategies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Typical stuff. If you've done a lot of this for me already, like the IP thing can take forever. If I've got to go and talk to patent attorneys, but if you have the documentation ready in a data room that's titled technology, IP, whatever, I can go in there and look at it, check in the box. It's fast. So this one piece could take anywhere from a week to, or actually from a couple of hours to multiple weeks. So a number of these are, not all of these, of course, apply to everybody, but I do think that most investors. So what we learned, so there's actually a statistic in the angel trainings that says that if you do at least 20 hours of due diligence as an angel, it raises the expected return of your investment something like 2 to 3 times. So it's a weird statistic, and I'm sure it was done by somebody's master's thesis, who knows where, when, with a weird sample. But I do believe that most angels will, typically themselves, VCs will really dedicate at least 20 hours of real time, not just calendar time, but real time effort working on the case, and then some a lot more. So my advice is you can impact that DD process just by being ready for it. So I think if you a classic seed round, so if we're talking a seed round from 1 to 3 million, then we're talking generally probably about 3 weeks to a month is a typical DD process. If we're talking about a pre-seed of 100,000, I think a week to 2 weeks, and then kind of everything in between.
May I add something, Will?
Yes.
Just one thing regarding the term sheets that I think regarding the due diligence phase, the term sheet is actually something to consider, because in most cases, the term sheet actually dictates the deadline when the due diligence has to be completed.
Correct.
So if you can get that in place, that basically gives you the calendar time that sort of is the back end for it.
So super important point. And I'm thinking pre-seed, very early stage. I kind of made the point that often now term sheets are more like just commitments in an email. I totally agree with Tapio that optimally you will have a term sheet's typically 1 to 3 pages. We actually, my Lithuanian fund, we really pride ourselves on having a 1-page term sheet. But at this point, so typically the term sheet, the terms are good for 30 to 45 days, and that will basically, once you get that term sheet signed by both parties, then you'll undertake this 30 to 45 days. And yeah, I think that's probably a reasonable assessment. What's the role of grants from Business Finland during seed funding? Can they be added to the fundraising mix? How well are they accepted practically? So again, this depends. My view is they're very positive here in Finland, in particular for pre-seed. Seed a little bit less, but again, for if you're when I look at that funding roadmap that says how much money do you need now to last you 12 to 18 months, I'm generally thinking of how much equity that drives some grants and loans. So so in that sense, when we do funding roadmaps with my companies, we're definitely thinking about, okay, we need this much equity, we need that, once we get this much, we'll apply for a Business Finland R&D grant for 200,000. And then, later point, we'll apply for the young innovative companies, whatever. So I think they're accepted, but you can overemphasize them. And that's, I think, the biggest danger is if you give the investor the view that you're driving your fundraising strategy on grants, that's a bad signal. If you're driving your fundraising strategy on equity, customer income, and then based on that, the ability to get grants on top of it, then I think you're fine. And funny enough, international investors, it's a very different instrument, the Business Finland, than any other country. I mean, even Sweden, Denmark, whatever, they don't have anything like that. So often you have to explain it. But if you explain it right, they get actually really excited, because again, if they invest 3 million, they actually get 4 million worth of capital. Yes. How do you build a network and make connections when all the founders are? Yes. So first of all, yeah, it's true. A lot of, and I've actually done, funny enough, a lot of the investors are introverts also. And I have a whole, actually the back end, I think, of this study, or the thing I showed, I have a bunch of extra slides in here, but I actually look at personality types of investors. And yeah, there's a classic. So you can think about, oh, yeah, I'm sharing. So it's always interesting if you can assess the actually, what type of a person you're talking to, whether it's another founder, whether it's an investor. This is what Fred Wilson is one of the best investors in the world right now, very much an introvert. So their tactics. So I have a perfect answer for this, it turns out, because I already I did a big study on this. So there's a lot you can actually, when you're analyzing people, you can actually develop strategies for how to build networks with them, what they're looking for, what they want to hear. And the funny thing is, I actually did a research project on this. Many investors have a lot of videos. So if you get a neuropsychologist or even a psychologist, whatever, to watch a 5-minute video of this guy answering questions, they will exactly be able to nail their personality type. And then you can actually build a communication strategy. So this is way over the top. I've seen this work, but to your point, going back, I think introverts, that's one good thing about, digital networking. It's a better place to actually discover people. Yeah, I mean, I think the answer, if you're an introvert, then it's something you need to just work on. It's something to again, you can play that to your advantage. But I do, when I look at teams, so one of the reasons I do this is we do psychological overviews of the founders and try to find out, do they fit together well? And it's best if you've got 3 founders that A, you understand the way you interact, and B, you try to find diversity. And diversity is often talked in terms of culture and other things, but it's also in terms of personality. So look for that. And then yeah, you just have to force yourself to do the networking. And that's, again, something that I know Business Tampere and the others do well, to pull people together and force them to interact. Because again, you definitely have to do that. Yes, so my 1-page term sheet I'll share. I'll share in that folder. Absolutely. Actually, it's even a 1-page shareholders agreement. So I'll share that. Keep in mind, it's 4 Lithuanian companies, but it's very similar to what you could do in Finland. I've not seen it done exactly like this in Finland. Our Finnish term sheet, honestly, is 2 pages. And yeah, anything else, Tommy or Dobsa or anybody?
Thank you. I think we are fine now with the questions. Time is running. We would like to now end this session. So definitely on behalf of Business Tampere and all the participants, Will, it was a pleasure and privilege to have you. How do you feel now?
Great.
Perfect.
If anybody that wants to reach out, you're more than welcome to. I don't promise 24-hour turnarounds because it's a little bit crazy right now, but I'm really happy to have interactions whenever, and if you think something in particular in Finland, if it's in health, in particular digital health, but also wellness, education potentially, and potentially, just super interesting company, send it over to me.
Wonderful. So definitely thanks a lot for the insightful examples. I think we really loved that you showed us the documents and the really concrete examples. Very valuable. And about the materials, I think it was already communicated to the chat, but just in case for everybody to get to know. So all the ones who registered for this session here today, we will send the material links and the video links to you after they have been processed, and the video recording will be available for maximum 2 weeks. So please look in that in time. And yeah, definitely also thanks for our participants. We are having a lot of program also during the autumn time, online especially. So maybe I could share you a quick advertisement about one of our events which is coming. Will, if you stop sharing, good. So we are having this one coming as well. Please note it. The registration actually is not yet open, but it will open right after soon. This webinar now ends. We are starting to prepare it more in detail. So about startup and law, this was a little bit handled also today. So please prepare all of those questions, what you have always wanted to know in terms of investments, contracts and term sheets and everything. So they will give the legal advisory point of view. And then also a few notes, there will be more content coming from our friends from Turku and Oulu. So please also stay tuned. More online content, digital webinars coming in November and December. So we will let you know, follow us in our communications. So the discussion will continue, and also for the last few words, Tapio and me, also let's say for the Tampere-based companies, we are always available for you. And especially this is a special offer for you. If you're interested in having one-to-one session with Will, please let us know right after this session now, and we will try to fix it, hopefully for the next week.
Also on my behalf, want to thank Will. It's always a pleasure to be in touch and deal with you. So that this was a good session. Also regarding like continuing from here, I just want to advertise a little bit my own sort of work here in Business Tampere. So as maybe quite a few of you know, you can book like funding clinic sessions with me through the Business Tampere website. So go there and you can see my calendar and the free slots there, and then just book a time, and then we can discuss anything and everything that basically was covered here today, and then also maybe some other things. So please use the opportunity and then make use of the service. And thanks for everyone for participating. We had a good crowd here today.
Thanks, great active discussion. So thanks a lot everybody, and have a great day.
Yep. Cheers.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. It was fun.
Bye-bye.